Guns, Germs and Steel, A Short History of Everybody for the Last 13,000 Years, is a popular science book by Jared Diamond. Jared Diamond is an American scientist born in Boston, Massachusetts. He was a biology research major with a PhD in physiology and with interests in molecular physiology, evolutionary biology, and biogeography. The author obtained his PhD from the University of Cambridge and spent 4 years travelling Europe, where in post-World War II Europe he learnt that the outcomes of people's lives were entirely different depending upon where they had been born. If you know when and where someone was born, you could know and understand whether their lives had been disrupted by war or if they had lived relatively normal lives like Americans. Then a trip to New Guinea in 1967 and 27 trips after that changed the author's life. According to Jared Diamond, New Guineans were then known as primitive people because they only had stone tools, they hadn't developed writing, and they didn't have kings or chiefs. But he soon learnt that they were very smart people, and he thought to himself, why didn't they have writing or steel tools when I, who can't find his way through a jungle or light a fire, did have writing and steel tools? This question eventually led him to writing the book this review is about. Published in 1997, Guns, Germs and Steel won the 1998 Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction, and the book discusses how guns, germs and steel shaped the history of the world, according to the author. Hi, I'm Nectaria, and I'm reviewing this book as part of Social and Cultural Perspectives in Public Health at La Trobe University. This book's a history book approached from a science angle involving evolutionary biology, zoology and social sciences. Diamond wrote this book as part of his search for the ultimate explanation on why history unfolded differently on different continents. With a focus on native societies, he shows why Eurasians became disproportionately more powerful and innovative, and with the help of literacy, metal tools and food production, allowing them to conquer and exterminate other societies. The author argues that these differences came about not because of biological differences of the people themselves, but because of differences in their environments. In other words, Europeans are not genetically more intelligent than Aboriginal Australians. Another theory Diamond argues against is that the Europeans had the advantage of a colder climate which allowed them to be more inventive, when in fact, first inventions came from warmer Eurasian climates. Diamond begins the book by giving a brief overview of evolutionary history before the rise of civilization 13,000 years ago, going on to give an example from Polynesia and how the same ancestors can spawn diverse societies depending on the island environment which they inherit. The Maori people became intense farmers with weapons, and when they happened to visit a nearby peaceful hunter-gatherer society, the Moriori, they overtook them, killing and eating them and turning the rest into slaves. The differences in environment had sealed their fates. Another example is the capture of the last Inca emperor by the Spanish and how one small group of Spaniards defeated an entire army through germs, guns, horses, literacy and political organisation. Diamond then goes into the development of food production and why it arose independently in some regions, adopted in others or not at all in remote isolated areas. Farming was developed based on suitability and availability of domestic plants, climate, altitude and domesticatable mammals. All of the 5 major animals, cow, sheep, pig, goat and horse, and the majority of suitable wild crops are found in Eurasia. Further, the east-west axis of Eurasia leads to a more temperate climate than the north-south of the Africa and the Americas. He argues that the development of agriculture leads to sedentary societies, allowing dense populations and for people to have more possessions, free thinking, and for the development of specialised societies. Such societies give rise to infectious diseases like smallpox, and with the spread of Eurasia, hunter-gatherer societies became exposed to new diseases with no previous immunity, putting them at a disadvantage. Diamond then goes on to discuss how food production gave rise to the single most important invention in the last 1,000 years, and that's writing, and how this has been shown archaeologically, However, writing wasn't the only invention, and society's receptiveness to technology is based on cultural factors. He explains this by using the phrase, "Invention is the mother of necessity." That's right, first comes the invention, and then society can be persuaded to need it. For example, a car. The two reasons Diamond gives for this accelerating development is the Great Leap Forward, which includes development of modern language by changes to our brain and voice box, and the adoption of a sedentary lifestyle. With the development of agriculture, society went from an egalitarian band to tribes to chiefdoms with a leader, and where classes, taxes, and political organisation was formed. Neighbouring societies who saw farming either adopted it or were displaced. Guns, Germs and Steel has been met with both praise and criticism. This was the first book I'd read of its type, and to be honest, the subject matter wasn't one I'd researched or given much time to before. Therefore, Diamond's theory made perfect sense to me, and I enjoyed it. But of course, without much prior knowledge, I found it hard to consider too many criticisms. But one question I did have playing in my mind was, so what? So what if Europeans have the advantage of being at the right place, at the right time, with the right technology? Does that give them the okay to conquer, exterminate or displace natives in discovered lands? Does it give them the okay to develop policies like the White Australia policy of not so long ago? And it still doesn't explain their preference for war, battle and domination. The world would be very different today if they had an all-encompassing, peaceful, anthropological approach rather than a violent one when discovering new worlds. And Trozio agrees that Diamond glosses over that just because you have guns and steel does not mean you should use them for colonial and imperial purposes, or handing out smallpox-infested blankets from sick wards. What drove the political decisions made to use advanced technology as a weapon? The book makes the conquering by Europeans as a passive event rather than the calculated decision of a few. The second question I have is Diamond's comparison to the biological theory. Do people actually still believe this? As in, nowadays in the 21st century, do scholars actually give weight to the fact that the Europeans on the whole were smarter than the natives they encountered? Surely not. Now, a number of reviewers argue that Jared Diamond is actually providing quite a Eurocentric view, in spite of his book trying to explain why it's not the natives' fault that they were dominated by the Europeans. The proximate factors behind Europe's rise are its development of a merchant class, capitalism and patent protection for inventions, its failure to develop absolute despots and crushing taxation, and its Greco-Judeo-Christian tradition of empirical inquiry. Blount, in his essay, argues that Diamond's view is utterly Eurocentric and that Diamond ignores a huge amount of literature that questions each of these points. Shreve, another author, states that this biological superiority belief, most often held unconsciously, is that European hegemony had something to do with their superiority as people, even though we may no longer speak of it. However, Shreve does believe that the book should be taken with a grain of salt, and that the breadth of topics requires Diamond to be an authority on anthropology, archaeology, plant genetics, epidemiology, and a social, military, and technological historian, which no one can be. I'm not sure I agree with this view, as I don't think at any time in the book does Diamond claim to be any of those things. In the book, however, it is clear that the author must have a good understanding of human societies ranging from hunter-gatherers to modern civilizations. In the book, Diamond does discuss the need for a new kind of science, a historical science, although he does acknowledge the difficulty one would have in trying to determine cause and effect. I believe that this book is an interesting take on history. It is a favoured text in universities and has sparked numerous debates over the years. What I found interesting in my research is that Jared Diamond has personally replied to his critics, both in the preface of his book, in editorial replies on his website and other media. He takes a lot of time out to defend his research, practice and beliefs. I see how the rise of agriculture and food production can lead to dense populations, and with density comes more disease, more thinkers, and political and economical organisation. However, the idea of Europeans being recipients of good fortune is a drastic oversimplification of our history. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out to listen, although I know you didn't have a choice. I'd also like to acknowledge the following websites where I obtained my images, and the following references who helped me in doing this review.